Welcome to the Deep Dive. We've pulled together a stack of source material for you today, and honestly, it covers an absolutely wild range of stuff.
It really does. We're looking at everything from global conflicts and their immediate ripple effects on markets all the way through, corporate strategy complexities,
Right.
some tricky spots in personal finance, potential major policy shifts coming out of Washington, and even a really striking human story from a recent disaster.
Right. It looks like a pile of completely disconnected headlines at first glance.
Right.
But our mission, as always in these deep dives, is to not just summarize the facts, but to really unpack them.
Yeah, dig in a bit.
We want to extract those key nuggets of insight, see how these seemingly separate threads might actually connect, and most importantly, figure out what it all means for you.
Let's not waste any time then. Let's jump straight into this stack and start exploring.
Okay, let's really dig into this first big section because Friday, June 13th, was an incredibly intense day on the global stage. The sources lay out exactly how quickly things escalated.
Yeah, they do.
It kicked off early Friday morning with Israel initiating what they described as a targeted military operation against Iran.
That's right. The sources detail that these strikes hit specific targets related to Iran's nuclear program and ballistic missile capabilities.
Okay.
Critically, they also resulted in the deaths of several senior military leaders, including the commander-in-chief of the IRGC, that's Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a major military and political force there, Hossein Salam.
Wow. Huh.
And Israel's stated intention was to continue this operation as many days as it takes.
And Iran's response, as the sources show, was swift and significant. Later that same day, Iran state media announced the hard retaliation operation has begun,
Right.
launching more than 100 drones and ballistic missiles back toward Israel.
Now, the U.S. involvement, according to these sources, was purely defensive. They helped Israel shoot down the incoming missiles.
How'd they do that?
This involved positioning Navy destroyers like the USS Carney and USS Arleigh Burke off the coast of Israel, and utilizing ground-based missile defense systems like Tiagi and Patriot batteries.
Well,
The Pentagon had apparently moved some military assets into the region in anticipation of potential escalation after Israel's initial action.
but here's where it gets really interesting, looking at the different accounts in the sources. Secretary of State Marco Rubio described Israel's initial strike as unilateral and explicitly stated it happened without U.S. support or involvement. He emphasized the U.S. priority was solely protecting American forces in the region and warning Iran against targeting them.
Yeah, but then what's fascinating is how President Trump's perspective, as reported in the Wall Street Journal and on Truth Social, contrasts slightly.
Oh, so?
He acknowledged the U.S. was aware of Israel's plan beforehand, and even expressed pleasure with how they utilized American military equipment.
Okay, interesting difference there.
He then used the situation on Truth Social to pressure Iran, saying they had a second chance to make a deal after his ultimatum expired, warning of worsening conditions but suggesting a deal could prevent further bloodshed.
And the immediate diplomatic fallout. Iran state television quickly reported they were pulling out of the scheduled sixth round of nuclear negotiations with the U.S. in Oman.
Right, they were supposed to happen that Sunday.
Suspended indefinitely.
Wow, this rapid geopolitical escalation had almost an instantaneous and dramatic impact on global markets by the end of Friday.
Yeah, you could see it immediately. Stocks reacted negatively. The Dow Jones Industrial Average tumbled by over 700 points.
And you saw the classic flight to safety and concern about supply. Oil prices surged dramatically. Both WTI, that's West Texas Intermediate, the U.S. benchmark, and Brent crude futures jumped more than 7%.
7%, that's huge.
WTI actually neared $74 a barrel at one point. Then, after Iran's counterattack, oil prices were reportedly up over 8% in extended trading,
Wow.
with sources noting crude prices closed at their highest level since March 2022.
And gold. People always run to gold, right?
Gold, yeah, the ultimate safe haven asset during uncertainty, saw a rush as well. It rose to a near 2-month high, even hitting a record $3,431.20 an ounce.
A record. Okay.
That's pure demand for protection when things get unpredictable.
Bond yields also rose. The yield on the benchmark 10-year Treasury was back above 4.4%. What's driving that?
Analysts point to two main drivers there: renewed inflation concerns directly tied to that oil price spike, and simply classic safe haven demand pushing bond prices down.
Which makes yields go up. Got it.
Right, because that spike in crude oil immediately adds upside risk to inflation expectations. Higher inflation risk means the Federal Reserve is less likely to cut interest rates anytime soon,
Ah, okay, the Fed connection.
which in turn makes the U.S. dollar more attractive.
And speaking of the dollar, it rallied nicely on Friday, up 0.3% to around 98.19 against a basket of currencies, recovering after trading near a three-year low on Thursday.
Its role as a safe haven during global turmoil was clearly reaffirmed, showing gains even against other traditional safe havens like the Swiss franc and the Japanese yen.
Did analysts expect that?
Well, ING currency strategists noted they might have expected an even larger rebound given such a significant shock to stocks and bonds, suggesting some disappearing correlations might be capping gains.
Interesting.
However, the potential for this tension in the Middle East to persist means the dollar could continue to see support.
Now, if we connect this global tension to the nuts and bolts of the world economy, one immediate impact is on global freight shipping.
Absolutely. The sources indicate ship owners are getting very cautious, with some already deciding to avoid the Red Sea and particularly the Persian Gulf altogether.
The Strait of Hormuz is the absolute choke point here, isn't it?
It connects the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea. We're talking about roughly 20 million barrels of oil passing through there every single day. That's nearly 1/5 of global shipments.
1/5.
It's also a critical passage for container ships heading to major hubs like Jebel Ali.
So what are shipping companies being told?
Maritime security firms and associations are reportedly issuing strong advice. Prepare for rerouting. Seriously reconsider transiting the strait and areas near Iranian waters. Find locations near friendly and protected waters.
Okay.
And check for any affiliations, especially with Israel, as that significantly increases perceived risk for a vessel.
And the risks are pretty starkly laid out, right?
Yeah. Any perception of U.S. involvement alongside Israel increases the danger for ships. An escalation could directly impact freedom of navigation,
Like missiles or mines.
including the potential for missile attacks or sea mines being used in the strait. While the strait was reportedly still open and traffic flowing as of Friday, the situation is obviously tense.
And we saw this in the Red Sea, didn't we? Ships rerouting, even with discounts.
Exactly. The sources mentioned that recent practices in the Red Sea show just how quickly wariness leads to massive diversions, despite things like Suez Canal discounts, with Suez traffic still down significantly from pre-attack levels.
And all of this translates directly into costs, I imagine.
For sure, rising insurance premiums for ships, cargo, and crew are expected, and carriers will likely start pushing for security surcharges on top of standard freight rates.
From a broader U.S. economic perspective, what's the outlook?
While analysts' current base case is still for limited overall impact, the sources acknowledge the risks are real, and some are quantifying recession risks as being slightly higher now.
Okay, so heightened risk.
And just to add another layer to this complex global picture, one China expert quoted in the sources suggested that China sees this escalation as losing their proxy Iran and that their Middle East policy is in disarray.
Really? What else do they say?
This expert even warned that China might pressure Iran or another aligned group to strike us, pointing out that groups like Hamas, the Houthi militia, and Hezbollah have Chinese weapons, and that Iran's weapons systems use Chinese computer chips.
Wow, that adds a whole other dimension. A complex web of connections there.
It certainly raises an important question about those dependencies between global powers and these regional conflicts.
So that's the intense, unpredictable realm of global geopolitics and markets. Let's shift gears now, but keep that idea of navigating complex landscapes, because the sources also have a lot to say about the corporate world companies adapting, struggling, looking to the future.
Absolutely. Starting with the tech giants, there is a surprising detail about Adobe.
Oh yeah, what was that?
The sources note its stock actually declined by 5.3% on Friday, even though the company reported what's described as a headline beat and raise quarter.
Wait, beat and raise, but the stock went down.
Yeah, and they even stated that artificial intelligence is fueling new demand for their creative tools. Seems counterintuitive, seeing the stock drop on what sounds like good news.
It really does stand out. Meanwhile, Amazon is trying to navigate its complex healthcare ambitions. What are they up to now?
The sources report they're undertaking another reorganization of their Amazon Health Services business, breaking it into 6 pillars.
6 pillars. What's the goal?
The goal is pretty straightforward. Simplify the structure, move faster, innovate, and try to solve what they call the fragmented patient experience.
Has this been tried before?
Well, this follows recent departures of several senior health executives, suggesting some internal challenges. It's also part of Amazon's decade-long effort to gain traction in the healthcare market.
Right, they bought PillPack and One Medical.
Marked by big acquisitions like PillPack and One Medical for $3.9 billion, but also setbacks like shutting down Amazon Care and disbanding the Haven joint venture with JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway.
So, a mixed bag. Are they making progress?
Despite these stumbles, Amazon is reporting very strong growth in their health offerings, though they decline to share specific financial figures.
Okay. Another fascinating corporate maneuver is happening with 23andMe. The founder is involved, right?
Yeah, founder Anne Wojcicki, through a new nonprofit she's established called the T10 Research Institute, is buying back substantially all of 23andMe's assets for $305 million.
Buying it back after the bankruptcy.
This move actually outbids an earlier offer of $256 million from Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. It comes after 23andMe filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in March, around the time Wojcicki stepped down as CEO.
And what assets are included?
The key assets being acquired are their core personal genome service, that's the consumer DNA testing business, their research services division, and their telehealth subsidiary, Lemonade Health.
What's her stated goal?
Wojcicki's stated mission through the nonprofit is to continue helping people access, understand, and benefit from the human genome. This acquisition is still subject to court approval, though.
Okay. Moving from specific company news to broader corporate strategy, the sources highlight how multinational giants like Apple, Microsoft, and Pfizer continue to benefit from favorable tax structures in Ireland.
Even after the double Irish loophole closed.
This is even true after the controversial double Irish strategy was phased out and the corporate tax rate there rose to 15% this year.
How are they doing that?
They're leveraging other provisions, like capital allowances for intangible assets, to legally reduce their taxable income and operating expenses. Okay. It's a long game there.
This strategy traces its roots back to Ireland's decision to open its economy to multinationals after an economic crisis in the 1980s. Their tax incentives in the 90s were seen as key drivers of GDP growth.
And companies stay for more than just tax, right?
Reportedly stay for the educated workforce, access to the EU market, and existing historical relationships. Not just tax, but tax is clearly still a major factor.
In the packaged food world, Conagra Brands is making a big bet. What's their play?
They're launching dozens of new frozen food products in June, specifically targeting budget-conscious shoppers who, due to economic concerns, are cooking at home more often.
Makes sense. But isn't frozen food getting expensive, too?
That's the challenge Conagra faces, according to the sources. The packaged food industry has significantly increased prices over the past few years, jumping 25–30% between 2021 and 2024.
Yeah, that's a lot.
This makes things like frozen meals potentially less appealing on a pure value basis compared to cooking from scratch, which is generally cheaper per calorie and gives you leftovers, or even compared to aggressive deals being offered by some quick service restaurants right now.
So what's Conagra's argument?
Despite recent sales declines, Conagra is banking on the convenience, longer shelf life, portion control, and reduced waste of frozen meals to appeal to these stretched consumers, using innovation and promotions to highlight the value.
Okay, we'll see how that pans out. Looking further out, the future of flight is taking a concrete step forward with JetZero's announcement. What's happening there?
They plan to build a massive $4.7 billion factory in Greensboro, North Carolina, specifically for their blended wing body jets.
Blended wing. Those look different. $4.7 billion is huge.
This is being hailed as the largest economic development project in North Carolina history based on its potential job commitment over 14,500 jobs.
Wow. Are there incentives involved?
The state and local incentives are substantial too, over $1.1 billion in state performance incentives and over $450 million for infrastructure improvements.
What's the timeline?
JetZero is aiming to start factory construction early next year and have their Z4 plane in service by the early 2030s, with a demonstrator flight targeted for 2027.
Are airlines interested?
They're partnering with airlines like Delta, Alaska, and United, who are interested in their operational expertise and interior design for these new planes.
And finally, in this corporate roundup, Archer Aviation, which develops electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, sometimes called air taxis, saw its stock drop.
Why? About 15% following an $850 million sale of its shares. Dilution concerns, likely.
Okay, so we've looked at the unpredictable global forces, the strategies and struggles in the corporate world. Let's bring it closer to home now and look at issues that directly impact individuals and families.
Yeah, we have a couple of stories here that offer some really potent lessons.
Absolutely. First up, the sources detail the court battle unfolding around the estate of Jimmy Buffett.
The singer.
Yeah. This case over a $275 million estate isn't just celebrity news. It's a real-world, high-stakes illustration of the increasing litigation around wealth transfer, and specifically, the inherent risks you take when you set up family trusts with dueling trustees.
Dueling trustees. Who's involved?
The core conflict is between Jimmy Buffett's widow, Jane Buffett, and Richard Mosentor, who served as Buffett's longtime accountant and business manager for 30 years and is named as the co-trustee alongside Jane.
Okay, so widow versus the longtime advisor. What are the complaints?
Jane's lawsuit alleges hostility from Mosentor, claiming he refused to provide her with financial details, was collecting excessive fees, reportedly $1.7 million a year,
A year? Wow.
and was mismanaging assets. She points to projected income on the $275 million estate being only about $2 million a year, implying a return of less than 1%.
Less than 1%.
While Mosentor acknowledged $14 million in distributions from Margaritaville properties over 18 months, she says he wouldn't give future projections and warned her trust income might not cover expenses. Jane also stated she felt he belittled, disrespected, and condescended her.
Ouch. And what's Mosentor's side?
Mosentor, for his part, has filed his own lawsuit. He alleges Jane was uncooperative, interfered in business decisions, refused meetings, and breached her fiduciary duties by acting in her own personal interest rather than the trust's.
So, a real clash. What do outside experts say?
Attorneys quoted in the sources offer a perspective here. They say these cases often come down to a dynamic where the beneficiary feels they aren't being informed or respected, versus a trustee who might be acting overly paternalistically or rigidly. Emotions must run high.
Understandably high, especially when a spouse is involved, as they often lose the direct control over assets they had during the marriage. The attorneys also caution that fees like Mosentor's, while high-sounding, aren't necessarily excessive given the scale and complexity of a $275 million estate.
What about the low return?
They also point out that non-income producing assets like multiple properties or private planes often found in large estates cost money to maintain, which can eat into available trust income.
Okay, so it's complicated, but this specific case really underscores two critical lessons for anyone navigating their own estate planning, right? Especially wills and trusts.
Yeah, definitely. Lesson 1, loud and clear. Communicate your wishes.
Seems obvious, but people don't do it.
This connects directly to broader data points in the sources showing a pretty significant lack of estate planning in the U.S. One survey found only 1 in 4 Americans actually has a valid will.
Only 1 in 4, that's low.
And it's not just about having a document. Barely half, 48%, understood their own parents' end-of-life wishes, and nearly a third, 30%, have never even discussed end-of-life finances with their family.
Why not? Just uncomfortable.
Discomfort is cited as a major barrier by over half the respondents.
And the consequences of this lack of planning are substantial, aren't they?
Yeah. Dying without a will, which is called dying intestate, means your estate can get tied up in the slow public process of probate court, and the state's intestacy laws, not your preferences, will dictate how assets are distributed.
That sounds like a nightmare for families.
It can lead to real financial struggles for loved ones. Sources note many families struggle, about a quarter have difficulty accessing necessary funds, and roughly 40% end up having to turn to credit or loans just to cover immediate expenses.
Wow. Okay, so lesson 1 is communicate. What's lesson 2 from the Buffett case?
Lesson 2, highlighted by that co-trustee dynamic. Choose your trustees incredibly wisely.
Don't just pick a friend or business partner.
Attorneys suggest that while it might seem natural, close friends or longtime business associates aren't always the ideal choice for a trustee. They might prioritize what they perceived the deceased person's wishes to be, perhaps based on old conversations.
Instead of what the trust actually says.
Rather than strictly adhering to the legal terms of the trust document for the current beneficiary's benefit. Professional trustees who understand their role is purely to administer the trust according to its written terms tend to be involved in far fewer problematic cases.
Okay, that makes sense. So the practical takeaway here, bringing it back to you, the listener, while the Buffett estate is complex, the barrier to getting some planning done is lower than you might think.
Right, you don't need $275 million to need a will.
Exactly. Online will-making platforms like Trust and Will or Quicken Willmaker and Trust mentioned in the sources make creating a legally binding will much easier and more affordable. They're recognized in all 50 states.
But maybe not for everyone.
Though admittedly, if you have a very complex situation like a large estate or minor children with unique needs, consulting with an attorney is still advisable.
And crucially, once you have a will, don't just file it and forget it.
Right. Review and update it every 3 to 5 years, or certainly after any major life event like a marriage, divorce, birth of a child, or moving to a new state.
Good advice. Moving from personal planning to potential government policy that impacts families, the source's detailed proposals coming out of the House Republicans called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Okay, what's in it? What are the stated goals?
House Republicans have stated the goals are to boost family finances, proposing a $1,000 investment accounts for newborns and an enhanced $2,500 child tax credit. They estimated these changes could mean up to $13,300 more in take-home pay for an average family with 2 children.
Sounds good on the surface.
Yeah.
What does the impartial analysis say?
However, the impartial analysis from sources like the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, which provides independent cost estimates for Congress, points to significant potential negative impacts, particularly on low-income families.
Aye.
Primarily because the bill emphasizes work requirements for benefits. According to the CBO's analysis, households in the bottom 10% of the income distribution would actually lose about $1,600 per year on average between 2026 and 2034.
Lose money. Where would that come from?
That loss would primarily come from proposed cuts to Medicaid and SNAP.
Okay, let's break down some of those impacts, starting with the child tax credit. It's bigger.
While the maximum credit increases to $2,500 in the proposal, it's not fully refundable.
What does fully refundable mean in practice?
What that means is low-income families who pay little or no federal income tax won't receive the full benefit. They can only receive the credit up to the amount of taxes they owe.
So if you don't owe taxes, you don't get the full $2,500.
Exactly. Based on the proposal, an estimated 20 million children would be left out entirely because their families simply earn too little. A single parent with 2 kids, for example, would need to earn at least $40,000 a year to get the full credit.
Wow, 20 million kids. Any other exclusions?
Also, families who use ITNs, that's individual taxpayer identification numbers, often used by immigrant workers not eligible for Social Security numbers, would be excluded, affecting about 4.5 million children.
And how does this compare to past versions?
Analysts contrast this with the previous fully refundable child tax credit, which they said cut child poverty in half.
Okay, what about the Earned Income Tax Credit, the EITC?
The Earned Income Tax Credit, another major support for low-income workers, could also see new pre-certification requirements under the bill.
What's the concern there?
Sources note this could create significant administrative barriers, potentially preventing eligible families from receiving the benefit, a problem that occurred years ago when similar requirements were in place.
Making it harder to actually get the credit.
Right, and the sources detail nearly $300 billion in proposed cuts to SNAP through 2034.
SNAP food stamps. That's a big cut. Who uses this SNAP?
SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It currently supports over 42 million participants, 40% of whom are children.
So how would the cuts affect them?
Under this proposal, more than 7 million people, including over 2 million children, could see substantial reductions or lose their benefits entirely.
And new work requirements, too.
For the first time, work requirements would apply to households with children over age 6. Additionally, states would be required to fund 25% of SNAP benefits themselves.
Wait, states would have to pay part of it.
A significant shift from the current 100% federal funding. This could force states to cut benefit levels or potentially even decide to end their SNAP programs entirely.
Which could affect school meals, too.
Which also puts children's automatic eligibility for free school meals at risk, as SNAP enrollment often qualifies them.
Wow. Okay, what about health coverage?
Finally, the bill seeks roughly $1 trillion in cuts from health coverage programs like Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act marketplaces, and CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program.
How would those cuts work?
Medicaid work requirements could lead to coverage loss for many adults in expansion states and even potentially make it harder for parents or pregnant women to keep coverage by requiring them to document exemptions.
And for kids?
Barriers could also be introduced to make it harder for children to access Medicaid or CHIP by blocking rules that simplify enrollment.
And the ACA marketplaces.
The sources also estimate that 4.2 million people could become uninsured by 2034 if enhanced ACA premium tax credits aren't extended. Those who keep their marketplace plans would face higher premiums.
How much higher?
Potentially $2,400 more per year for a family of 4 earning $65,000.
Okay, so significant potential impacts there, especially for lower-income families.
Yeah.
And just briefly, the sources also touch on companies finding themselves in difficult positions related to immigration enforcement.
Yeah, what was that about?
Mentioning examples like a car wash in L.A., reportedly visited twice by ICE, with family members describing detentions and losing contact with workers, including one who missed his high school graduation.
That's tough.
It also notes a detail about a billionaire member of the Walmart founding family, reportedly endorsing protests in this context, alongside discussion of potential employee fear and boycott campaigns.
Okay, let's wrap up this deep dive by sharing one story from the sources that truly captures a moment of profound human impact and sheer chance.
This is the poignant story from the crash of Air India Flight 171.
Keep the Dreamliner crash, right?
It was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner that crashed just moments after takeoff from Ahmedabad, India, on Thursday, bound for London. It went down into a residential area, hitting a medical college hostel building.
Just off.
This was reportedly the first fatal crash of a Boeing Dreamliner and the deadliest crash in years. There were 242 people on board, and tragically, all but one were killed.
One survivor out of 242. Who was it?
That sole survivor is Ramesh Viswaskumar, a 40-year-old British national of Indian origin. His was an extraordinary escape, described in the sources.
How did he get out?
He was sitting in seat 11A, which was located near an emergency exit. He recounted getting out through a broken emergency exit in the immediate moments after impact, just before the plane caught fire, and then there was a blast.
Oh my God, what did he say about it?
He described the horrific experience, saying things like, "I can't explain, everything was happening in my eye, and a little bit of fire after I'm out, then blast."
Unimaginable. Is he okay?
He suffered burns and was hospitalized, and was understandably described as being psychologically disturbed by what he witnessed and experienced. His brother called his survival a miracle.
A miracle seems like the right word. Did he describe the crash itself?
Viswaskumar recounted the plane feeling like it stalled or came to a standstill in the air after takeoff before crashing with speed into the building. He noted that the side of the plane where he was sitting landed where there was enough open space for him to get out,
Pure chance of where his seat was.
while the opposite side hit a building wall. He saw others, including the air hostess, die.
Just harrowing. What about the investigation? Any initial thoughts?
An investigation is now underway, looking at everything from the black boxes, which record flight data and cockpit audio, to maintenance records, the pilot's actions, the plane's configuration, and weather conditions.
Standard procedure.
An expert quoted brushed off a manufacturing issue due to the plane's age, suggesting it seemed to get off the runway but failed to climb.
Okay. And the 787 has had some issues before, right?
Past issues with the 787 line, like a whistleblower complaint, a grounding due to fuselage spacing issues, and earlier battery fires, are mentioned in the sources as relevant context for Boeing's history with this aircraft.
But not necessarily the cause here.
Importantly, they weren't cited as necessarily being the cause of this specific crash, pending the investigation.
It's just a powerful reminder of how chance and circumstance can play such a role in moments of immense tragedy.
So, bringing you back now from that incredibly moving story, we've truly covered an immense amount of ground in this deep dive today.
We really have.
From the rapid escalation of international conflict and how global markets reacted in real time, to the strategic maneuvers and challenges faced by major corporations, proposals out of Congress that could directly reshape support for families, and deeply personal stories about navigating life's complexities, whether it's estate planning or surviving the unimaginable.
What stands out looking back at this stack is how being well-informed often means understanding that these aren't isolated events. There are connections, implications, ripple effects.
Everywhere you look.
Impacting everything from your investments and career prospects to your personal financial decisions and even the safety nets potentially available to you.
We really encourage you to think about which of these threads resonated most with you and perhaps sparks a little more curiosity for you to explore on your own.
Yeah, definitely worth considering. Let's leave you with this final thought to mull over. In a world where unpredictable global events can have an immediate and tangible impact on your financial well-being,
Right.
and where proactive personal planning can potentially prevent immense hardship for your loved ones down the line, how actively are you navigating that intersection of the big picture out there and your own life right here?
Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.